I grew up in a Chinese family where every time my grandma stuffed me full of dumplings or when my mother comforted me when I cried, I recognized that the world went beyond just myself. I grew up in a culture where when I was thankful to be part of a community, and when I was grateful for the loyalty and appreciation of friendships beyond myself again, I recognized that there was something more beyond just the individual. But when I look around my country today, I see rugged individualism, selfish inequality, and unsustainable structures throughout America. Because I believe in the Asian collectivist values I prefer and propose today's motion, this House prefers Asian collectivist values over Western liberal individualism. Before I begin my 2 cents of arguments, I'd like to present a few characterizations of the motion on the framing. Today's debate revolves around the comparative. Do we prefer a world structured around Asian collectivist values or those structured around Western liberalist individualism? What does our world on side proposition look like? It looks like a world in which Asian collectivist values are ones that are prioritized, being 1, the prioritization of socioeconomic prosperity and well-being for all of society rather than just individuals. 2, the loyalty towards authorities, including beyond just government officials, but towards elders and families as well. And 3, governments that are more concentrated in political power on our side, able to step in when they are needed. What does side opposition's house look like in today's debate? We tell you, 1, it looks like the promotion of freedom of individuals, even if it comes at the expense of the collective. And 2, governments that typically remove themselves from implementing any policies that actually could intrude on individual freedoms. Because in this debate, the state has an obligation to promote the public good for all individuals. We on side proposition will prove to you why our side is principally and practically better for all individuals. Our first substantive argument concerns social benefits. Now, how does Asian collectivist values ensure the quality of life for everyone involved? 2 reasons here. Firstly, about how it promotes communal growth. We think a crucial part of Asian collectivist values is the idea and focus on collective individuals as a foundational component of society. This comes before the individual for a few reasons. Firstly, because in terms of reciprocal obligation, each individual has a reciprocal obligation to the community, which is oftentimes what raised them, what nurtured them. And when you belong in issues and structures such as a family, you have some inherent obligation towards your mother. Second, we think that a collective growth helps individuals, but the necessary vice versa does not apply. For instance, if I was able to participate in a job, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone else around me benefits. But if society chooses to promote more jobs overall, evidently everyone is better off. Why do we think this is important? Because Asian collectivist values promote a long-term sustainability that moves beyond simple individualism. This means things such as universal health care, where even though many individuals may complain that they have to pay more, it still benefits an overall broader society because each individual has an entitlement towards better health care and well-being. What is the comparative, however? We think Western liberal individualism creates a system of winners and losers, necessarily where losers are instead predetermined. This means that in terms of Western individualism, that atomizes each individual person from a broader community. Rather than being a person involved in a broader structure, you become an individual. And oftentimes, those who are already at a disadvantage by these political structures are set to fend for themselves. Insofar as history has always left behind an unequal playing field, we don't think this promotes an equitable starting point. This means things such as the right to education is not guaranteed, where you cannot have access to disrupt the cycles of poverty we see on side opposition. But a point.
If you live where I want to build a factory, or use a river that the factory wants to pollute, you're the one who is harmed because you're not the interest of the collective.
Actually, we would just build a overall river and then collect all of that in terms of it. I think that collectivist values necessarily ensures that you would be harnessing the potential of that river and things like dams to ensure all society benefits. But let's move on to our second point here. We would promote healthy families and social relationships in terms of Asian collectivist values. If we solely focus on the individual, what happens? We find that in the United States or European cultures, for instance, that oftentimes elderly parents, families, other authorities that you would consider are often left behind. This looks like individuals who are placed in nursing homes because their children no longer care for them or feel that obligation because, alas, they're just an individual. This means that in contexts where Christmas time, you have a depressed individual where you have elderly homes that do not necessarily feel any sort of legal tie-in towards these individuals overall. But on our side of the house, we say that we should have these kinship structures, that a necessary component of Asian collectivist values, if anyone has watched Crazy Rich Asians, say, you have and see an obligation and reverence instead for those grandmothers in Singapore, for those individuals who have the social foundation that is so important. We think this is what allows you to give back to your community. We think this gives you a framework of support that shows that each individual belongs in some place. But our second substantive argument concerns economic benefits. How do we think that Asian collective values ensure sustainability for the working class? A few reasons here. Firstly, we think that collective socioeconomic prosperity that is valued on our side of the house takes precedence over individual profit incentives. This means that we prioritize the welfare of all individuals, encouraging collaboration rather than unproductive competition. We think that instead of individuals where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, we have a necessary structure that ensures things like Singapore's minimum wage, where even though wealthy individuals may face a higher tax, that overall socioeconomic redistribution benefits everyone involved in society. This means and looks like China protecting workers as well, through things like the automation revolution. Although all of these jobs are threatened by artificial intelligence, we can still ensure things like robot taxes or other instances where individuals can benefit. But secondly, we think that our side of the house prioritizes the public good over private property regimes. On Western individualism, we see a direct focus on material gain, one where private property reigns free and where individuals are entitled to own something simply for the sake of it. But because this public good often trades off with this private property, we now recognize that things like infrastructure, railroads, all the basic necessities for a better society are lacking. Instead, on our side of the house, we have Asian collectivist values that take away this fundamental corporate greed. That instead of placing individual reign in terms of a free market, we have some sort of regulations that are necessary to promote the public good. Things like environmental regulations, where instead of oil companies exploiting the environment because they're simply private property, there is some necessary regulation as well. But thirdly, we think that Asian collectivist values prevents these socioeconomic hierarchies that must necessarily develop throughout Western individualism. In terms of the free market and private profit incentives, there must necessarily be a concentration of wealth. For instance, in the West, we see things in concepts like the top 1%, where Bernie Sanders can easily criticize a structure of capital that systematically leaves no way to climb up the ladder. In our world, however, we see a stronger concentration of such political power, an opportunity for the government to be a guiding hand rather than such an iron fist. Instead of these individuals that are left to free reign, where pharmaceutical companies are able to have skyrocketing prices, absent price controls, where Western individualism violates fundamental freedom and rights in a contradictory stance to the public good, we're proud to affirm a vision of society that recognizes the importance of kinship structures, of families, of the community rather than the individual. Proud to propose.
With all due respect to Brian's nostalgic feelings about what it was in China, we ask ourselves why so many Chinese immigrants have gone around the world when China was really the Asian collectivist country that everyone wanted to get away from. Three arguments in this debate. First, about justification, why it is morally wrong to leave the minorities, not to have a democracy, and why this can't be a democracy. Second of all, about how it hurts the majority, the people that they're trying to defend. And third of all, why it hurts the minorities, the people who are most vulnerable. And even if we lose the majority, we still need to prioritize the minority. My second speaker is going to be talking about why these dictatorships are likely to backslide into tyrannies and be worse for everyone as a byproduct of the Asian collectivist values. But before that, quite a bit of rebuttal. First of all, notice that they need to protect not only the fact that we protect people being more communal and having this in schools, but rather changing the governmental system to a system which works on this. Why? Because the motion assumes these kind of things. It's talking about political levels. It's talking about authorities. Authorities aren't respecting your family members. No, it's respecting the authorities and the political system of the government. The debate assumes that we're talking about governmental change. The debate assumes that we're talking about changes on the governmental level. The moment that this is true, two things. First, notice how their entire point about family values changing falls out of the debate. Because we can protect situations in which people and schools protect and talk about public awareness and talk about being nice to your family members. What we don't protect is the fact that it's going to be on the state level what this debate assumes. 3 minutes of their analysis around this debate. Second of all, notice how when they talk to us about the economic prosperity of not leaving anyone behind, they simply don't have enough analysis to prove this in the first place. We're going to talk to you about how instead of doing this, they're bringing down the winners and down the losers, making everyone losers at the end of the debate. The equality is worse for everyone, not better for anyone. The moment that this is true, notice they have very little on their side other than nostalgic feelings about communities, not real analysis why it should be implemented on the governmental level. Let's go into my positive material about justification. Notice how inherently these governments and these big governments which have these Asian collectivist values simply can't be democracies. Why? 3 reasons. A, they don't allow any real criticism about the government because you constantly need to be in orbit. Second of all, because we say, look, they just centralize the government. You don't have different houses of parliament debating things. You don't have different parties who can talk about it, etc. Third of all, notice how they fundamentally don't help minorities. Minorities fall out because they are under the tyranny of the majority. They don't have the people, those ones who need the individual freedom are falling out of this debate. Why is democracy an inherent right to any civilian? Look, governments have the responsibility. People have inherent rights, basic rights to them. Rights to security, rights such as life. Look, the moment that they give the entire control over these rights to a certain government, we say that that can only happen with a contract. The social contract needs to have 2 things for it to be in any way legitimate and for the government to take control of it. First, it needs to have an opt-out system, right? People need to have the ability to choose whether or not they want to be part of the country. We say that the moment that it looks anything like China, the moment that it looks anything like Russia, it simply can't be so. Why? Because if it would, notice that all the rich people that they want to keep in the country will simply leave, and then they don't have the opt-out system. Second of all, we say you need to have, as a citizen, someone who's giving up your rights, the ability to change and the ability to influence whether or not your rights and how your rights are being affected. Notice that it doesn't happen the moment that there isn't a democracy. Because at the end of the day we say, look, it is an inherent human right, because you have basic rights and because you have a contract with the government, that you live in a democracy. They're taking away that right by putting in these Asian collectivists. That is fundamentally not okay. That is fundamentally unjust. Notice how this compares to nothing about legitimacy from their side. Let's move on to the second point about how it hurts the majority, something which they talk a lot about. 3 things here. First of all, notice how the fact that even if it's materialistically better for a lot of people, we say that is simply not the most important thing for many people, right? The fact that they're socioeconomically better off is simply often something which people under-prioritize. What are we talking about? We're talking about religion, people spending tons and tons of money on their religion. We're talking about people spending on their ideologies. All of these things can't be on their side of the house. Why? Because the moment that my religion harms the sustenance and growth of the economy, the moment that the fact that I'm building Muslim mosques rather than building factories on areas, that harms the public growth and the public socio-economic level. These things can't be around under their side. And notice, these things are being taken away. My freedom to express myself, my freedom to come in with a shirt, to come in to the capital with a shirt which criticizes the government. My freedom to express myself in ways which may harm public growth and may harm the public is simply taken away from us, and we say that that is illegitimate. That is the thing which is often much more important for these people. That is why they often spend so much on it, much more important to them than materialistic gain. Second of all, we say on the majority, look, they just have much more fear, because the moment they go majority, you never know when you're going to stop being a minority, when you're going to stop being a majority. When we see see Stalin after befriending the gulags, making them the main enemy, when we see China moving where it wants to build its Olympic stadiums and ruin the houses and tear them down there, we say you never know when you're going to stop being the majority, and that creates a system of fear. People rather having an insurance, even though for the long term it means that they're often going to have a little less money, that means that their house can't be torn down and they can't lose everything. That is something which people always prioritize. They prioritize the security. The security is taken away from them the moment that the government can entirely influence everything about them, and the moment that the government simply can disregard their right for individual freedom. The moment that the government can choose that because it is economically sustenance to build a Olympic stadium inside of a city, or to pollute a river, or to build the factory where my house used to be, that is the moment where I live in fear every day that can happen to me. That is the moment where I lose this security, where I lose this insurance. That is something which the majority often doesn't want. Before I continue, yes?
Last time I checked, China and Singapore weren't morally backward societies without a shred of human rights or rights to privacy, especially given their economic prosperity in recent times.
Like, seriously? That economic prosperity that you're talking about comes at the cost of hundreds of lives. It comes at the cost of 200 million people in China who live in poverty. It comes at the cost of all the Chinese immigrants who are forced out of their homes. It comes at the cost of the Muslim minorities who are put in concentration camps because they're critical of the government. That is the cost they're talking about. That is an illegitimate cost. Third of all, let's talk about the last thing that we think about majorities. Look, we say it just doesn't help economic development. Why? Because the fact that the government tells everything and directs things from the higher level, we say it just can't be relevant to each person and person in the society. The government can't tell me whether or not I'm going to be a better worker at this, or whether or not I'm going to be a better worker at this. We say at this point I'm much less productive and much worse at the end of the day. Look, the comparative in this debate is very simple. A, there is a massive harm for the minorities in these countries. There's a massive harm for the Muslim minority, which is put in concentration camps. There's a massive harm for the minorities who have the houses where their houses shouldn't be because they harm economic growth. There is a massive harm for the religious minorities in these areas. We say, look, these minorities deserve the right to be defended. These are the most vulnerable. These are the most important. But second of all, even if not, we say, look, the majority doesn't do well out of this because it lives in fear, because it doesn't really get economically prosperous, because it is far off, because all of these reasons oppose.
Sure, on our side of the house, a factory does get built that displaces some 5-odd people, but all the profits go to the rest of society, and because we believe in collectivist values, you pay back those 5 people. But on their side of the house, the factory still gets built, but the profits only go to the CEO who believes and funds the factory, and you just displace the people because, you know, why believe in collectivist values? We think they won the debate for us on their very own POI. In my speech, 3 things. First, I'm going to refute to you the feeble analysis brought to you by side opposition and their substantive material, then rebuild our case, which isn't going to take a whole lot of work based on the refutation they gave you, and finally give you our third substantive argument. So first onto their case. We disagree on framing a little bit here, right? They bully us into trying to say we have to support tyranny and authoritarianism, and they want to fearmonger us in today's round. No way. Like, we don't have to defend tyranny, right? Like, we're talking about something far more subtle. We're saying you have to garner state power in order to execute these economic regulations we're talking about. There's a big difference between giving the state the power to regulate and giving the state the power to become tyrannical. 2 different things. They're running away from the motion. Don't let them do it. But now, they give you 2 ideas. First, they say you destroy democracy. One question we ask is, what good is democracy if it only benefits the people already in power? First, we reject the narrative that this is even tyranny. We say that's not part of the debate. Secondly, we say the government needs this power in order to protect individuals. In the United States, when we protest for gun laws, why do we not get any change? Because the power of the individual outweighs our ability to be safe in our own schools. It's the same free speech they're talking about, these same individual rights, which make it impossible for democracy to actually represent the majority. Because inherently, they're representing the individual minorities. Thirdly, we think it's important they actually distinguish from the system of government and the values, right? Two wildly different things. Like, we ask them to debate what is Asian collectivist values, not what does China look like at its very lowest ground. Like, at the point in which someone is picking a winner and picking a loser, when you're saying, you're part of the collective, you're not part of the collective, you're part of the collective, you're not part of the collective, we say that's not our ground to defend, that's literally picking individuals to support. That's their side of the house.
Sure.
The second idea they give you is about how it's going to hurt the majority. First, this is not this house supports uniformity, right? Like, that is not the argument. We're giving you detailed analysis about economic incentives for why we should get rid of things like private property, why we should get rid of things like profit incentives for very few privileged individuals in order to protect the laborers and the working class. Secondly, let's take a quick gut check here, right? Which side best protects the majority? Do you think it's the side which says, you know, we should protect the individual right and ensure that CEOs can continue abusing their laborers because it's their individual right and the government should never step in? Or do you think it's the side of the house which lifted 64 million people out of poverty in 20 years in China because we decided it was more important to protect the laborers than the privileged few who had unjustly acquired capital and continue to circulate it between themselves? On the gut check, we're clearly protecting the majority here, right? And thirdly, fine, we'll bite. We say rights aren't absolute. Insofar as your rights are infringing on the majority, we believe if you really want to talk about democracy, then you lose those rights if they affect the majority. But I'll take a point.
This debate is not Asian collectivism versus the United States, right? Please note that in Europe, for example, there's much more welfare than in the entirety of China.
Cool. We would say welfare is literally saying you value collectivist ideas. You're promoting the general welfare. Thanks. We went on that too. On to our case. Their only response is that we don't have any analysis. Like, come on, right? Like, Brian spoke for 8 minutes. He clearly gave you analysis. We need them to refute a little bit more in order for this debate to start. But I can reiterate it and rebuild this case, and maybe they'll respond to their next speech, and then we can actually engage with each other. The first thing we told you is you benefit the social, because you say you ensure quality of life. This looks like things like universalized healthcare or socialized healthcare. While on their side of the house, you protect the individual. So, if it's a system of winners and losers, but the losers have already lost because they've been marginalized, then there's no chance for them to have any power of ever actually winning. The people who are already on top stay at the top. Then we give you economic analysis here, right? We say in our world, you value sustainability. What does this look like? It looks like getting rid of private property when necessary or limiting profit incentives. So, in the face of the AI revolution, in which robots are going to displace millions, maybe billions of laborers across the world, we believe the only way to protect those people is if you say, you know what, CEO John, you don't have the right to just implement robots in order to displace all of those people. That's the difference in the economic incentives. That's the economic analysis that they want us to give. On their side of the house, they don't believe the government has any right in stepping in with regulations. We think that's extremely problematic. At the point in which they've already conceded that, you know, it's a good thing if the government steps in, when does the government regulate? To promote collectivist majorities. We believe they concede when they talk about socialist democracies. But now on to our third substantive argument, about improving the political sphere. What does collectivism look like and how it affects policy decisions outside the country? We say they continue to focus on being collective, obviously, but with the entire world. They attempt to promote other economies and promote their general welfare. What does this look like? It looks like Chinese expenditures across the world in which their incentive is to build up other flourishing economies on a value level. And also they believe, you know what, this is going to make sense for us economically, because if that's a flourishing economy, our trade is going to bolster both of us. It's going to bolster us on the collectivist level. But how does collectivism affect policymaking in the country? Let us be very clear. We say collectivist states give lots of resources, lots of protections to its people. So in response, when the people respond with loyalty and reciprocity, we think that's fine. When do they stop being loyal? When the state breaks those collectivist values, no longer is actually helping the majority. We believe that's the problems on their side of the house. At that point, they're no longer principally responsible in giving that loyalty to the state. But in contrast, in the comparative world, how does individualism affect policymaking outside the country? Individualism here, their side of the house, looks like imperialism. Why? In terms of economic growth, individuals see other countries as a means of economic gain. They don't care about the group they're affecting insofar as abusing diamond mines in South Africa gets me a few $1 million a year. Additionally, it looks like saying that country needs our freedom. That country isn't individualized enough. We think individual freedom is a euphemism for whitewashing. It's the same justification which led the United States to imperialize the Philippines, the same justification which led Europe to carve up the entirety of Africa. This idea about economic gain and individual freedom, that they need to be liberated from their oppression. But how does individualism affect people inside the country? Again, it looks like benefiting those who already have the capital. We've so clearly won because they failed to engage with the debate. I'm proud to oppose.
Two unfair framings that came from side opposition. First of all, they are clearly talking about only the United States. When they say, when a couple of billionaires that are lobby owners control the country, we admit it's not Asian collectivism. But it sure as hell is not individualism in the proper sense. They did not explain why individualism means necessarily lobby owners own the country. And moreover, we see that in the majority of Western countries that do individualism, such as in Europe, it doesn't happen. One terrible system is not a way you win a debate. Second of all, they try to run away by saying, oh, look, whenever you support collectivism, you support their side. Please note, if in a democracy where any individual has a right to vote decides that he cares about welfare, that's fine. When the government doesn't ask its people and assume that collectivism necessarily means you have to control, you have to give benefit, only economic benefits to the majority, that is the point where you're on their side of the house. Let's talk about better life for a second, because their entire case is, look, now we support inequality, we help inequality, right? We give better life. We say, first of all, look at, for example, in Europe, there's much more welfare than China gives. Why? Because people gathered up, decided that helping elderly, helping the poor is important to them, even an expense of economic benefits and prosperity to the majority. Helping the poor is more important to them, and therefore they voted for collectivism. We think that's the majority of cases, especially when there's a majority that is poor and wants to be taken care of, also on our side. But second of all, what they missed is helping the minority or the poor is oftentimes not the incentive of the collective and economic prosperity. When in the United States, helping those who are hurt by globalism, by building factories that don't make economic sense but give them work, that is something that will only happen under individualism but will not happen on their side. Giving workers rights and risking less factories and less jobs happening is on their side of the house. Helping the poor people that live where the factory needs to be built is on our side of the house and not on their side of the house. They have to defend the fact that oftentimes helping collectivism and helping the collective economically means harming and infringing on the rights of the weak, because helping the weak is oftentimes makes no economic sense. So for example, high levels of tax oftentimes create less economic prosperity, but we do them because we care about the poor, not on their side of the house. But then we talk about, please note, things like they assume that the only thing that the majority cares about is prosperity, right? We explained that as we see in most elections, that is simply not the case. We care about much more things. We have certain values that are not economic prosperity. We care about the environment. We care about our family. We care about having more parks, etc., etc. This does not happen on their side inherently by the definition of the motion. Second of all, we also explain why they're much less likely to just be effective, because they do support uniformity. They say we do not have have to support uniformity. We say when China tracks kids and from a young age and tells them you have to do this job because that's where we think you'll be most effective, and blocks their ability to have degrees in other areas, that's the point at which you do have uniformity to a very large extent. But then we say, look, on our side of the house, if most people care and want economic prosperity, since we have democracy and we ask people what they want, we're going to get economic prosperity. True, we will not get it to the extent they do, but we get a pretty large amount. But the minorities are the ones that we protect on our side, and on their side, they're railroaded by, no thank you, they're railroaded by the collective. When the minority wants to criticize the government because it cares about about building mosques and not factories, it's railroaded. When farmers need that stream for their drinking water, but it's polluted by the plant that hires more people, the collective wins and the minority is railroaded. This is what they have to support. They have to support more inequality because the weakest are railroaded by the strong state. And this also answers the feeble response to our justification, right? Because they say, oh, democracy doesn't really matter when you don't help the weak. We explain, first of all, you do help the weak much more on our side because you give the weak a voice, even when it's not beneficial for the collective, which is, by the way, the majority of times. But second of all, we say it doesn't really matter, right? We say even if you help more the collective on their side, democracy is not about the majority wins and the rest can wait to next election. Democracy is about the government, no thank you, the government has a right to take away your rights and to decide over your life only if you have some control of it, only if you can vote, only if you can criticize. When you cannot, it's an illegal form of government, an immoral that we cannot support. Before I move on to talk about why they do have to support in many cases full tyranny, yes?
We would say in a world where democracy literally centers itself on whatever the majority chooses, it's very likely that it will shut out the minorities you champion.
No, and this is the exact difference between a democracy and collectivism. The majority would always have the most influence on how the country looks. But in a democracy, the minority has a voice. Minority parties have an impact. We find some sort of middle ground. In collectivism, we do not care about the minority because the collective is the only thing that matters. That is what they have to support. No. Let's talk about backsliding to tyranny. Look, they have dictatorship to a very large extent, right? Because they have to support centralization of power and a huge regard to the authorities, which means very little legitimacy for criticism. We say that creates the fundamental grounds and institutions for dictatorship. It means very little, there's no votes and no elections. Oftentimes, there are no distinguishing between different authorities of government, right? Oftentimes, the leader has full control of his party and oftentimes full control of the entire political system in that country. Now, they rely on that, the leader and his party will keep caring about the collectivism enough so they can keep helping what they believe is the good of the country. We say that that's really, really unstable ground, right? Because if in one point the leader suddenly feels uncertain about his place and doesn't want to lose his power, or in one point there's a new leader who comes, it's his son, it's a different person, that suddenly doesn't care that much about the collectivism, that's the point at which we backslide to tyranny. Now they can say, oh, but tyranny is not Asian collectivism. We agree. But Asian collectivism gives the ground for tyranny, allows it to happen, makes it 10 times more likely because it builds all the necessary institutions for tyranny to happen, and all it needs is just for us to wait till the wrong leader comes. All we need is to wait until he feels uncertain enough so he starts holding on to power as hard as he can, even if it doesn't help the collectivism. That is what happened in Chile. That is what happened in Argentina. That is what happened in Cambodia. We cannot trust the goodwill of dictators and leaders who have full control to keep caring about the collectivism no matter what. Because we're the ones who protect inequality. We're the ones who protect minorities. And we're the ones who have the full justification because we give people a voice. I am so proud to oppose.
which, heads up, is a Western liberal democracy, school shootings continue to persist because we believe in the individual's right to bear arms. In my country, the KKK website is open for young black children to read online because an individual has a right to speak about whatever they think. In my country, individuals who get sick choose to stay at home and not go to the hospital because they know that they'll drown in the bills that come from privatized pharmaceutical care and hospitals. Because we recognize that an individual has a right to get their own economic gain. That's the world of the opposition, a world where the collective has to fend for themselves because we pursue individual gains over everything else. We tell you, in a world of the proposition, we recognize that collective values is what keeps society functioning. The very things that they try and narrow today's debate around with European policies are things that center themselves on the general common welfare, crossing the house into the proposition. In this speech, I'll be doing a few things. The first is responding directly to side opposition's third argument that they gave us in the last minute of their speech, and then moving on to discussing the two key questions that should summarize today's debate. The first, on which side best uplifts people, and the second, on how do these ideologies that we are talking about in today's debate play out within the global atmosphere. But on to the argument that we hear from opposition's third. We hear, firstly, that ultimately what they tell you is that we're going to backslide in elections, we're never going to be able to stop this concentration of power, these ideologies are going to lead to dictatorships and tyranny. That's literally the exact rhetoric that they are telling you down the bench. That the idea of focusing on the collective is one in which you give everybody in the government the power to be able to structure things so that only the individuals will suffer. We tell you it's actually quite the antithesis, because when a government is in power and you have the centralization of power, that's the exact things that you need to be able to ensure that policies that center around the collective actually come into play and are implemented, right? The reason why the United States can't care for certain individuals, the reason why European countries for so long couldn't truly center itself around what was best for the collective was because we were told that the government can't have a centralization of power, the government can't play a role within society because it takes away from the individual. If you believe in things like ensuring that people can get basic health care, like ensuring that people can get a basic education, then you have to have the government, you have to have a form of concentrated power. But secondly, we think that even if in their scenario where it is like this dictatorship, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's as nasty of a word as it sounds, right? We think that there's different forms of benevolent dictatorships like we see in Singapore, where Asian collective values ensure that individuals can still be able to prosper, can still be able to get some sort of sustainability, and the government ensures that that actually happens. That's something that we completely advocate for on our side of the house. But on to the first question in today's debate, which is which side best uplifts people. Firstly, let's evaluate this through an economic lens of Asian collectivism values, right? Because when we tell you that there's actually a multitude of ways in which collectivism values can transcend the way that economic policies operate. First is through the idea of being able to regulate corporate greed, right? Because if somebody wants to come and build and I'm an individual and my sole purpose is to get as much money as possible so that I can be the most successful individual, I don't care if I hurt people in my factory. I don't care if I don't give them living wages because I recognize that I can make a bigger profit. That's always going to be my incentive. But in a world where we ensure that you have to characterize that every individual is protected, that every collective of the society is secure, you have to be into imposing certain corporation regulations and ensuring that they actually get a form of gain. But the second area where we see that we can regulate these kinds of things is just in basic human greed, right? Because in a world where we allow for individualism to run rampant, to continue on, we think that it leads to a lot of people truly being able to just go and obtain as much private property as possible. Why is this problematic? Because absolutely everything that side opposition has been telling you has been based around the assertion that the majority always has economic power. But the thing is that that's absolutely not the case. For histories, for decades upon decades, we've We've always seen that historically, many people have been set back because of policies or certain structural institutions that have kept them from being able to be at the same equal playing field. What that means is that there's always going to be a 1% that can buy as much property as they like, have luxury dinners every night, while the rest remain suffering. We tell you, in a world of Asian collectivism values, we would ensure that everybody gets dinner on the table. Everybody gets to go to bed in a home that has electricity, water, and the ability to succeed. We tell you that in our side of the house, we ultimately think you're actually going to get a form of success. In the world of which you have these kinds of capitalistic, individualistic values, it's always going to be comprised of a system of winners and losers. But since you're so encouraging, yes.
For the first time, can you please argue anything that isn't just the worst example for individualism in the world, which is the US,
right,
and start arguing Europe, for example?
Right. I'm happy to do that. If we want to talk about individualism in Europe, it doesn't look like collective policies like general welfare programs or ensuring universal health care. That's something that goes to our side of the house. That is not individual gain, because there's no right to the individual in that side of the place. If you want to debate about individualism, take the country that screams individualism during every election, the United States. It's not an absurd thing for me to bring this up in the debate. But secondly, we have to question, why does this matter? We think that economic gain ensures that there's collective distribution to many people, right? Insofar that this can transcend to socially uplifting people and ensuring a form of quality of life, it's absolutely beneficial in the long term. What did we tell you? We told you that you get things like universal health care. You get things like quality education funded by your federal government, instead of in a world where we privatize education so only the rich can get the top degrees, only the rich can go on to get successful jobs. We tell you structurally, we give everyone an equitable field so that they can ensure that they get certain rights. And when they go into the industry, it won't be shut out by things like automation because one individual found a way to productively make something and get more profit, but rather slow things down with automation so that way everybody can get a job, everybody can maintain a form of income. That's something that uniquely comes from our side of the house. All we hear from them is really, though, you're going to censor people and they can't speak up against their government. We tell you that somebody censoring individuals is not really what happens on our side of the house, right? Unless it uniquely poses a threat to the collective. For instance, if the KKK was posing some sort of like harmful, instigating violence like rhetoric online, we think it's okay to censor those kinds of things. In their world, those things have to remain online because it could impede upon an individual's right to speak up. The second question in today's debate: how do these two ideologies play out in the global atmosphere? It's really quite sad that I have to spend just a little bit of time on this because we got absolutely no engagement in their last speech, but hey, now it's an independent reason to vote for our side. Because what we tell you is that when you have Asian collectivist values, you actually see that in the long term, these transcend into foreign policy values. That's why, if we look to the past of Western imperialism, of Western individual ideologies, it looks like things like whitewashing, exploiting countries that may be more vulnerable, because I, as an individual, want to get as much gain as possible. However, when I value the collective, that transcends into my foreign policy by ensuring that individuals that I trade with, ensuring that individuals that I increase my expenditure with, also get the exact same opportunities that I stand for within my own country. That's why we stand firm on side proposition.
Don't let Team Proposition mislead you with a wrong definition from their side as to what individualism really is. Individualism does not mean at all costs to prioritize individual rights over the benefit of others. If a certain post of the KKK gets to the level of incitement and leads to the death of other people, we do not have to support that if we support individualism. In this debate, proposition rather to stick to the one rotten apple in the form of gun laws in the United States. They consistently and systematically try to insist not to engage with most of our analysis that talks about the true nature of individualism that comes in the forms of many other policies in the US. In countries like the countries in Europe, they do not engage with us on that principle. We have three clashes in this debate. First of all, is collectivism a just form?
Point.
No, thank you. of regime. Secondly, what is better for the general happiness of people. And thirdly, about minorities. Let's dive in. First of all, about justification. We tell you that it is not a just form of regime because it is not a true democracy. People cannot opt into that. People cannot influence their environment in life. People do not have control over what's being decided for them. This is the key thing that we have to understand here. They're telling us as a response that democracy is not inherently good. We agree that in some very specific cases it might not benefit 100% of the society, but we most fundamentally tell you that if I cannot opt into that kind of system, if I cannot opt out from that kind of system, if I cannot make decisions and express my concerns about the government on a daily basis, then this is not a just form of regime. No response to that. Then we tell you that it might collapse and backslide into a tyranny. Their answer to that is that they don't have to defend a tyranny because it is not anymore collectivism. We disagree. We only think that it is likely if we have regimes like the one in China, it can very easily backslide into tyranny. They do not answer to that principle as well. Then they're telling us that we are abusing other countries as the US, for example, and this is bad. I want to remind you the motion about China expenditure, just so that you can all remember how China abuses other countries, right? If I care about the collectivism in my country, I'm likely to use and abuse other collectivisms. This does get along with their case. Even if anything that I'm saying from now on until the end of my speech is wrong, we have told you that it is very, very unjust and immoral to have that kind of system in the first place. Even if it is better to have that kind of system practically, it does not matter to our case. Let's go to the next clash about happiness. They're telling us a few things here. First of all, under their system you have more social frameworks, and this is good. We tell you, first of all, this is not inherent to their system. Not all of them have those kind of social frameworks. This is about the Chinese culture more than about the nature of collectivism. No, thank you. More than that, we tell you that it is not unique to their system. I go to the synagogue every Saturday night because I'm Jewish and I have my religion. This is a form of social framework that everybody has in most societies. This happens under our side of the house as well. Then comes their most important analysis that says it hurts the society because there are lobbyists which decide things upon us in a way which we do not want in individualism. And here comes the most important piece of rebuttal that they choose to actively ignore. What is that? We tell you that it is not inherent to individualism. Right? If the public really does not want gun laws, as the previous speaker describes to us, then individualism through system, it would not have occurred there. There would have been different gun laws if the majority of people wanted it there. This is why it benefits, no thank you, the majority of the people. We do not have to defend people committing crimes in prioritizing their own rights at all costs over children getting killed in their system. Right? We also tell you, if the public does not want that, then in our system, it will not happen. In the comparative, and this is what they forget, in China, people cannot express whether they want gun laws or not. In China, even if people want to bear arms, it will bring the vast majority of happiness to every single citizen. It will not happen under their system, because this is the nature of collectivism. Opposition is being silenced under their side of the house. I cannot express my wills and opinions under their side of the house. Even if a decision, a policy will bring more happiness, it is going to happen under our side of the house and not under their side of the house. No response to that. Also, they tell us that there is going to be a more equal distribution of money. And we are saying, again, they are not attacking the true nature of individualism by this case. We tell you that if the public wants it, then it's going to happen. See Europe. In Europe, we have many railroads. See in Germany, we have those trucks. No, thank you. If the public wants more welfare, then the public will get more welfare under a system of individualism. Now, if the public does not want that and it will bring less happiness, then there will be less welfare under our side of the house. We think that this is a good thing if the public wants less welfare under our side of the house. Under their side of the house, the public has no way to express that will, and therefore, it will bring less happiness. Now, let's go to the third clash about minorities. But beforehand, let's hear your objection.
In our world, it is not like we're putting muzzles on everyone's face to make sure that they can't ever speak out. Please engage with the middle ground, where people still have the rights to express themselves. If the collective wants something, the collective gets it. In your world, if an individual says no, the collective fails.
No, this is exactly the point. Under their system, if an individual, if groups of individuals really want something, they do not get that. But every person is a part of some minority groups, right? Whether I am a poor person, whether I'm Muslim and I want a mosque, whether I want more funding for arts, whether I want more welfare or less welfare, I do not. The government is only likely to do what's better for the majority of people. And when we're saying the majority of people, we're excluding many people, right? The reason that China, and now I'm going into my second question. The reason that China has one of the biggest concentration of poor people in the world being ignored, living in very poor areas and not getting welfare is because they are not the collective. It's because they are minorities. We tell you that under our side of the house, because this is a democracy, we have the obligations to take care about all of these minorities. We are funding arts, we are funding religion, we are giving welfare to the poor. Nobody dies out of hunger in the US, but in China, 1 out of 20 children is dying from hunger before he gets to the age of 18 because they are living in extremely poor villages, because they are not the collective, they are being stepped on because they are not the collective. This is the nature of collective. Even if a group of people really want something and it will bring them an extreme happiness, extreme meaning in life, if they will not get there under their side of the house, they are going to get that under our side of the house. What have we concluded in this debate? First of all, it is extremely unjust and immoral to force people to live in that kind of system that they are suggesting and that they're trying to mischaracterize our system about individualism. Secondly, it will bring more general happiness and people will get more of what they want as the majority under our side of the house. They do not have a way to express that under their side of the house. But most importantly, the minorities are being screwed under their side of the house, whereas they're being taken care of under our side of the house. For all of these reasons, oppose.
Side proposition lost this debate the moment it decided to make weak and the poor the center of this debate. Before I go on to our actual analysis, let me just use regular logic. What do you think is a system that protects weak more? A system that gives everyone, including the weak and the minority, a vote and a way to influence the system and the decisions, or a system that by definition only cares about the majority and its economic prosperity? I think we're on the right side here. Let's talk about how individualism looks. Because they say, basically, oh look, it's just one big lobby, one rich lobby that controls everything. We say, but that's exactly the opposite of individualism. And this is a misunderstanding for what individualism is. It is not a system where everyone takes care only of themselves and the freedom of an individual is more important than anything, no matter what. It is simply a system where every individual has a way to influence the system, has an equal vote. That is basically democracy. Now we say that specifically here, in a situation where the majority wants gun control and they do not get it, that's when a system is simply not individualism and is a failed example, and not when it is individual. Moreover, so we say that the only example to it is the United States. It's unclear why lobbies that control the state is inherent to any system individualism. Why is it is not clear? Because it was never analyzed, even though I pointed it out 3 speeches ago, right? We say that the exact opposite is right most of the times. We take the systems of individuals where everyone has a vote means that they're much more likely to take care of the weak, take care of the poor, even at the expense of economic prosperity for the already rich. So when they talk about nursing for the elderly, we say that's the example for our side. We are the ones who are likely to take higher taxes from the collective simply to help those who do not have any economic prosperity, who do not help our economy, but are simply weak people we need to take care of. right? Now, but let's talk about how Asian collectivism looks, because they say, oh, we support inequality and we help it. We say exactly the opposite logic, right? We say that helping the weak is oftentimes the exact opposite from the economic incentive of the collective. Raising taxes in order to have more welfare is oftentimes less beneficial for the rich collective and for the middle class majority. We say that helping the environment, even at the expense of less jobs for people, is something that is not in the incentive of the economy of the collective. We say that protecting farmers, protecting weak workers, protecting those who are harmed by globalization and are now jobless is the exact opposite of the collective. Protecting from AI, because because it takes some jobs, but it just gives cheaper food for the majority, is not in the interest of the economy of the collective. That is the point where they just miss completely what they have to do to win the debate. We are the ones who protect the minority much more. We are the ones who give them a voice. And it's especially funny when they say we don't hold a muzzle to their head. I think we all remember the picture of Chinese tanks aiming at students because they do not accept criticism. They do not accept anyone undermining the interest of the collective and its economy. And this is where my analysis of why this is extremely likely to backslide into dictatorship is so important. Because when I say, oh, don't worry, dictatorships can be benevolent, that exactly misses my point that we cannot trust it. We cannot trust it to keep being benevolent, and at some point it will stop being benevolent, and then everyone is screwed. Look, they have posed this debate as who protects the weak, who protects the poor. We are the ones who do it much better under our side. For all these reasons, I beg you to oppose.
On one side of the House, a majority is stomped out by a wealthy minority. On one side of the House, there are terrible labor conditions because of private influences. On one side of the House, people are starving. Their side of the House. Which is funny, because if that sounds a lot like the analysis they're giving you about us, it's because they've crossed the House the entirety of this debate. One major strategic error here, right? They say they want to regulate individualism. At that point, they're saying they like collectivism. In Europe, what are general welfare programs? They're policies which say when you value the individual, that isn't a good thing, so what we're going to do is implement regulations from a more powerful state in order to regulate the individual. We believe we've won right there because they've just argued for us for about an hour now. In my speech, two things. Which side protects the little guy, and which side best promotes sustainability? So first on the little guy, what comes out of their side of the House? What do they tell you? They say minorities are better on their side of the House because they get a voice instead of having a dictatorship. Like, that's just not true. The democracy says the majority wins. Then the majority rules, they disregard the minority. However, collective means you include everyone. That's the definition of collective. But even if it goes to a dictatorship, we ask them to distinguish between the value system and the structure. Like, if they're not willing to defend governments on their side, then like we're not going to defend the governments they want to pigeonhole us into on our side of the House either. But even at their highest ground, saying you create dictatorship, there's no democracy at all. Considering the values of Asian collectivism, we believe this looks like benevolent dictatorships like in Singapore, which lifted millions of people out of poverty and created a flourishing economy. We win on their ground. What do we bring you? We say the government has to step in to protect workers. Otherwise, things like profit motives and private property ensures those workers never get any rights, right? Like we give you the idea about automation in the future, which goes unresponded to. CEOs have an individual right and have an incentive to ensure they displace workers with robots. But on our side of the House, we say it's more beneficial for the collective to place robot taxes, to outlaw robots, to ensure you benefit the laborers. But even if you take both sides at their highest ground, why does any of this matter? We say we help the most number of people. We value the 99% over the 1% 100% of the time. But which side best protects sustainability? What did they say? Not a lot, really. They just say this thing about dictatorships, which I've already refuted. But in the three, then they say their world has collective government things, but not the individual. Like they're saying they want the collective, not individual rights. How is that not our side of the house? What do we tell you? We say on their side, you have no environmental regulations, no guaranteed healthcare to laborers, no labor laws because it looks like laissez-faire economics, because I as a company owner have an individual right to not be infringed upon by the government. We say the opposite happens in our world, where you don't give the government the power to become tyrannical, you're just giving them enough power to regulate, to ensure you regulate the individual, right? So, but even if you don't buy anything I've said at this point, they don't respond to our point about imperialism, which is an independent reason to vote for our side. Why is imperialism more likely on their side of the house? Because if I don't value other people, and I'm just caring about my own economic good, then obviously I have every incentive to exploit other countries for their natural resources, exploit other countries to ensure they give me their cheap labor. Their entire advocacy is hypothetical fear-mongering. Say, China is going to become tyrannical and step people out. The same justification the United States used to step in and free people from their collectivist states. We believe they've just fear-mongered in today's debate, run away from the motion, and then after they did that, crossed the House. We've won on the proposition.